rendezvous with death. At some disputed barricade. It may be he shall take my hand and lead me into his dark land and close my eyes and quench my breath. I have a rendezvous with death. And I to my pledged word am true. I shall not fail that rendezvous.
Playing games since the start of the 2000s, there have been many franchises I've become very fond of and gave me a burning passion for video games. Some of the most generational and defining ones that skyrocketed gaming into the modern world have seen some of the most ugliest downfalls and torn up identities in current times. I always thought games were supposed to become better in the future, and to some degree, you could say they have. But the biggest of games often were based off inspiration, something new and different from what we played before, something that would add variety and give millions of players a chance to find their game, a game they enjoy that has their own distinct characteristics, its own flavor. There are dozens of reasons why I can explain older games were much more memorable and still get replayed today despite the number of outdated years they have stacked up. But instead, I want to take one of the more forgotten franchises that once competed with the big dogs and dive into the spark that it was. Gears of War is a series where we have seen the new era not be so kind to the nature of their original games. The online experiences feel gutted, and the dark reality just doesn't feel real to me anymore. I don't feel much of the gritty world and darkness that made it stand out in the first place. What was Gears of War? Gears was really a craft that set itself apart from the raging popularity in games like Halo and Call of Duty at the time. While many like me enjoyed those first-person shooters that were taking the world by storm, Gears of War decided to take a piece of the cake and bring in a third-person cover shooter, something incredibly risky as the genre was barely proven and could have easily become a failed franchise. But that didn't happen, and instead collected itself a solid fan base that would carry itself for years on end. Why was that? Everything you did had gore everywhere, bodies being dismembered from most guns, blood spewing everywhere from ripping through enemies, heads being blown off from left to right. There was a lot of violence that you can certainly see where people may say it's too much. But I never thought that way. That's just Gears of War being itself. It makes it different from a lot of big games not willing to do something like that. I understand that just because something is different, it doesn't mean it'll be good, but I don't think that's the case here. Take away chainsawing, executions, body parts, the headshot crunches, and the whole intensity that the older games brought more of. It's just no longer cool and thrilling when you take it away or dull it down. The gameplay becomes bleak and generic, and soon everything else becomes that way. And while Gears of War is often known for the dark and depressing environment, the gameplay itself isn't supposed to be that way. The comical violence was special. It made matches feel much more personal, and that always left me wanting more. Who didn't love curb stomping and showing who's boss? Who didn't love getting those headshots? Who didn't love sticking nades to others? Everything carried much more weight. There are many advantages to having a third-person game. The events before a match have you picking your character for either side, and there was something unique with the characters that I never really hear talked about much. You could say most games incorporate character selection already, but in my incredibly biased opinion, I never cared for picking my character in almost every other game other than Gears of War, unless those characters had game-changing mechanics. Almost every single character is based directly off the campaign, and already has their own set of human characteristics that gives us this little thing called personality. A personality that allows us to have opinions of someone in 100 different ways, leaving us either liking or disliking them. Then you transition on over to the game where it's two armies fighting each other and actually feels alive with these characters. You're always hearing a line of dialogue for a lot of what you do. They all even have their own separate heavy breathing for the roadie run. You can see their personality bleed all over the engagements. It makes the match much more alive. This all leads to a choice when picking who we want to play as, and quickly developing favorites, which then can lead to attachment. And I've seen this be true when we see deaths of characters in the story. You can read about people and their connections to a character. That choice of picking matters because it shows us that we actually care who we are playing as. I'm not just playing as someone because they look cool. You could be, but I play as them for much more. Take the Carmine family. I love playing as them because I always think they have the funny lines and they're often the underdogs within the universe. They're likable to me. We have all those kinds of characters. And with these characters being linked to the story, it can help close the gap between campaign and the multiplayer. There's plenty of gamers that only play single player, and the same for online. With these characters, you have a better chance of piquing your curiosity to learn about each one and their story. You have a better chance to play the multiplayer and meet people online. It gives bigger meaning to the choices you make and the game you'll play for hours on end. This alone gave me a huge reason to enjoy my time playing online and with others around me. There was so much fun let loose into many elements of the game that gave it the deserving charm. It stuck to its element and remained true in the nature we know as Gears of War. The wave-based survival horde mode, holding out against the many creatures seen across the game. While the idea of holding out against waves of enemies in games has been around already, I'd say modes like Horde and Call of Duty Zombies experiences help bring vast amounts of innovating ideas to the table. The core was simple: survive. Gathering your squad of friends, picking your favorite characters, and choosing the position you want to defend was bound to please your mind for a while. It involved teamwork and moments of a final stand against an overwhelming enemy force. Some of my favorite moments came from the single objective of seeing how long I could last and having that adrenaline rushing through you as enemies push you to your limits. Future titles were certain to see improvements and big additions to the ever-increasing popularity of Horde mode. Gears 3 brought it to a whole other level with adding base defenses, giving us the currency to think about what to upgrade, and boss levels that challenge our capabilities of survival. Gears is known for its monsters and going bigger and badder with each. Now they threw those terrifying monsters at us every 10 waves. We were fighting some actual monsters that really spiced the game up. Mix this all in with the community and those around you, and you're set to have fun, fulfilling nights on the game. A mode that provides so much fun, I still think has great potential to be bigger and better than what it is today. It's a mode I dearly miss from the franchise. It's not gone, but at least the core of what made it fun for me is missing. Horde was in its own world, and just adds to the reasons why games can be so fun with additions that seem so simple. It all starts with a creative, inspiring idea that then snowballs into the full experience we get later down the road. I miss just being able to boot up a Horde game with 4 other talkative people and chilling for a while. It was no pushover. It doesn't have many boring enemies. I don't know if Gears 4 and 5 I didn't give much of a chance, but I can't remember ever having many fun times. I think too much was changed. I often forget how quickly Gears of War can turn into a horror game. You're always slapped back into reality when you remember the universe is surrounded by horrifying monsters pushing us humans towards the brink of extinction. This idea is used lots in movies and other games, but I've always loved the way Gears was able to capture it. If humanity is pushing towards extinction, you're bound to have a depressing world. It's always been debatable on whether you can call Gears a horror game or not, and while I wouldn't generalize it as one, it certainly can use those elements exceedingly well. It could be a horror game if it chooses to be. When it does become one, just be ready for mind-twisting and adrenaline-pumping moments. But I believe the horror is used to support the dark theme the franchise was always known for. It always felt more grounded than the silliness often portrayed, and that can be a very hard atmosphere to capture in a video game. How can a game be so goofy and wacky while also being able to be dark and gritty? It's a beautiful theme to have that the original games were able to execute so well. You could jump from these funny and more charming scenes to something really brutal and twisted. It's a snapback to reality, and I can't stop appreciating the franchise for giving it a lot more gravity. It just hits me in the feels and makes me care about anything they are trying to convey in the first place. A game can tell a story in better ways other forms cannot, such as environmental storytelling, a subtle way of building onto the universe outside of cutscenes and scripted moments. You choose to absorb this method of storytelling with the set pieces built into the environment.
This is horrible.
And within the theme of war, you can often find the art of destruction and see it at its finest. It's a magnificent sight to witness, despite all the terrors that lie beneath. That's what you can expect to see at various points in the games. It's in the journey to our end goal in each of the games where we're met with adventures. It's where you'll see all these large-scale locations that make you feel like a small piece in the puzzle. I don't know what it is, but when playing a level and it has a landscape that has a bigger scale to it, I just have to sit there and soak it all in for a second. But behind the theme and atmosphere, we develop our story, our characters, and the parts we may just remember the most.
Look, Marcus is busy saving the world again, so I gotta be there for him.
Carmine, you did good.
Well, thanks, Sergeant Phoenix.
I got your back, Sarge! I can't believe it, Marcus. We finally found her.
I told you they're breaking people. I can hear them screaming from the docks.
Although you may have more fun with friends playing online, it was always the story that stayed with me the best. I understand lots of gamers don't play the campaigns, but I wish they did, especially because you can play it together. But it was always the dark and sad moments that led me to have a bigger appreciation for the series. Playing it again for the first time in years, it aged like fine wine to me. It explores a range of emotions that grip me for the adventures in each game. You're amidst a war that really has no good sides. The COG army that you fight with has some dark roots, and they've had to make some tough choices, such as wiping out huge portions of their own population in an attempt to ironically save it. It's a fight for control over a planet that sees almost no peace. It's always war. But replaying the games, I was stunned, especially with the second in the series, a 2008 masterpiece that loved to add all these huge monsters. I mean, for goodness sake, you get to go inside of a giant worm. I'd instantly think a game from this time would have wasted its budget on just something like this. But then you just keep going from breathtaking location to location and fighting monster to monster until you realize the game is unfortunately over. Sprinkled in between everything is lore, story building, and just pure kick-ass moments. You can expect similar experiences in the other games, and I honestly think you'd be amazed at how well some old games could be. Ports over to PC and remasters could bring this franchise some needed justice. Growing up, you begin to understand more, and you further develop emotional maturity. Anything you revisit can open your eyes to something that you never grasped before. With Gears, I've come to feel more connected. I understand more. It's made me want more of something that has so much potential. But it was the trailers that just made me feel the darkness in this universe. They were preparing us for what awaited. It wasn't much of that over-the-top stuff that we get today. It added to the experience and got us interested properly. Even Gears of War 4 under a new studio had a really good one. Trailers like these left me in deeper thought. It was a way of feeling more real when telling its story and was just different from a lot of games at the time. I was invested. I cared what happened to our characters. I had to know what we would go through next. I had to see how much of a mad world it is out there. Kind of like how the real world can be. Maybe that's why I love the story so much, and why it was instantly stuck with me forever. The Gears of War games I may have a heavy bias for. I did grow up with them, and they went down a similar route that most of my other favorites went down with. It wasn't a real pretty route. Although shooter games were heavily popular and maybe overused in the earlier era, there was a reason why so many were sticking with millions of people. They all meant something to someone, and a lot of people had a sense of care for what happened to them in the years to come. That's where I believe a lot of hatred can stem from within the fans when they see their beloved game torn down. Change can be very scary, and in this case, proves why. That change can be nasty and destroy something we loved. It sucks. And it sucks even more when you realize that you may have said goodbye without ever even knowing. Gears of War was yet another game that had several unique elements that made it different from the other popular games out. It was big. It was full of its own online experiences and a compelling campaign. It was a game people were proud to say they played. In that little bit of time in existence where Gears of War was popular and created something special, I'm very happy to have experienced it.